Sherwin, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Let's just talk about the 6-week initial ceasefire phase and what does it entail then?
Allow me just for a moment to clarify what we've just heard from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Bongiwe. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office issuing the following statement that says the ceasefire has not been reached and that final details were still being ironed out. What we are seeing, though, is multiple news sources quoting mediating sources that were not allowed to speak on the record, right? So quoting sources saying that this deal has been reached. But we still have to have this final step from the Israeli cabinet that will convene tomorrow morning, according to Sarah's reporting from the region. They'll convene tomorrow morning to give their final stamp of approval, which will in effect then seal this deal. We are still waiting for the Qatari Prime Minister to speak in Doha. He will perhaps be able to provide greater clarity on where we are at this moment. But certainly a small spanner in the works here from the Israeli Prime Minister's office saying that this deal is not finally signed and sealed until, of course, that cabinet meeting tomorrow morning in Israel. But all indications point to the fact that we will be getting across the finishing line here for the first time in months. The first temporary pause that we experienced in this conflict was back in November of 2023. And so for more than a year now, you have had a very weary and traumatized Palestinian population in Gaza having to deal with the effects of mass bombing of the enclave, destruction of their homes, a constant evacuation orders that we now hope, based on the parameters of the agreement, which we have not yet seen, will provide some respite for these weary Palestinians that have been trapped in Gaza. What we must also say is that it will bring a glimmer of hope to the Israeli families that have been waiting for news about their loved ones that have been held in Gaza since their kidnapping by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. And so some respite for them as well, hoping that their loved ones will be a part of the 33 Israeli hostages that are expected to be released in the first phase of this agreement, right? It's a 3-phased agreement, certainly mooted in that way. The first phase will be 42 days in a halt in fighting. You will see staggered over a number of those 42 days, a staggered release of Israeli hostages in exchange, we understand, for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And based on the success of phase 1, which we understand negotiations will then continue as to when phase 2 would commence. Phase 2 would then see the withdrawal of the Israeli military from the entire Gaza enclave, the continued exchange of the remaining living hostages and Palestinian prisoners, hundreds we are told. And that would then lead us to a phase 3, which is months away based on the timelines we are seeing here. And phase 3 would then allow for the exchange of deceased hostages, so corpses in the main, and deceased Palestinian fighters. There will be an exchange of those corpses. And we understand that in phase 3, the date is yet to be determined, we will then see the complete withdrawal of Israel from Gaza and the beginning of reconstruction of Gaza. And I think it's important to take a step back here, Bongi, where we are at the start of something and not at the end of something. This ceasefire agreement is the beginning of a pathway towards peace in Gaza, but it's certainly not the end of the conflict per se. It's the beginning of something. Phase 1 will determine how phase 2 goes, and so on. And so we are at the beginning of something that could offer respite on both sides here, but we still await the final approval from Israel's cabinet tomorrow.
And as you say, Sherwin, that it's the beginning, and it speaks about just how difficult these mediation talks have been. And we've seen an on-off when it comes to some of the conversations, giving us a hint of just how difficult things have been behind closed doors.
Yeah, you frame it absolutely correctly. It's been on, we've been off, it's been on and off. We've been close to the finalization of an agreement. It was an agreement first mooted by President Biden in May last year. It was endorsed by the Security Council in June of last year. But of course, we never got over the finish line. In fact, Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States, right, we haven't had official word from the principals involved here. President Joe Biden is expected to address the nation later tonight from the Oval Office. But President-elect Trump taking to social media and saying the following: this epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. With this deal in place, we will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure that Gaza never again becomes a terrorist haven. And as I mentioned, President Biden expected to speak later tonight. But I think it also speaks more broadly to where we are at this point, right? Yes, there is a moment of hope here, a moment of respite on both sides. But Gaza is largely destroyed. Palestinians have no homes to get back to. They talk about now surging humanitarian aid into the enclave. Are they going to be distributing aid into 10 cities? How will this reconstruction process begin? How will the debris be removed from Gaza? Will the two the protagonists in this conflict observe the tenets and the prescripts of the ceasefire? Will we get to phase 2? Will we get to phase 3? There are so many unanswered questions, but what we do know is the UN Development Programme says that Gaza has gone back almost 7 decades in its development, and reconstruction is estimated to cost between $50 and $80 billion over the next 2 decades. Where's the money going to come from? Does this war end as reconstruction begins? So many unanswered questions as we wait for the principals, Qatar, the United States and Egypt to give us a better understanding of what this deal actually says and what the timelines are going to be here.
And add to that, the Israeli cabinet, as you said, and Sarah said earlier, that still needs to deliberate and vote on this tomorrow. So certainly, as you say, more questions than answers, Sherwin, as we now wait to then see what becomes the way forward. But thank you so much for that update. Appreciate it.